What's going on, guys? Tyler here from Don'tPanicDoThis.com, the site all about helping you to beat your panic attacks and anxiety. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about how to stop a panic attack while high on marijuana, aka cannabis, aka weed, aka pot. If you guys have ever smoked before, especially if you're prone to anxiety already, you know how scary it can be. The first time I ever took an edible back when I was a kid, years ago, I wasn't even slightly prepared for the journey that it took me on. It had all kinds of, it was that giggly euphoria, and then all of a sudden you're confused and scared, terrified, not really knowing what's going on, having panic attacks. And that's how smoking or consuming edibles or just partaking in cannabis in any way at all can be for a lot of people. When you get too high or things just get a little bit out of control, you can get really paranoid and just feel really scared and awful. So in this video, I really want to cover as much ground as I can here. I want to talk about why cannabis, why weed can give some people anxiety, how a weed panic attack feels different from a regular panic attack, and some of the possible symptoms of marijuana use, as well as talk about a whole bunch of ways that you guys can stop a panic attack while high, because well, that's the most important thing. When you get a little bit too high, you're just freaking out and looking for anything you can do that'll help level you out and bring you back down to earth. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this video. And by the end, I think you're going to know exactly what you have to do to prevent these panic attacks while high, as well as just how to stop them and how to hit the pull the ripcord when you absolutely need to and when things get really bad. So let's get right into it, guys. Now let's start with the basics here so that you get a little bit of an understanding of why you're feeling these feelings in the first place, understanding the science behind it. So when we're breaking down cannabis, trying to understand the chemical compounds inside that are working on us, there's two main things you have to know about. One is THC and the other is CBD. CBD, very popular now, legal almost all over the country, and you can buy it at a lot of stores, CBD oil, stuff like that. Typically marketed for relaxation, helping to calm you down, ease pain, stuff like that, whereas THC is a little bit more of the psychoactive effects, and that's the thing that's going to be making you paranoid, not the CBD. So if you just took a CBD product, it's very unlikely that you would feel anxious or anything from that. It's the THC, that psychoactive compound in the cannabis, that's making you feel anxious in the first place. This is because the endocannabinoid system likely plays a role in the anxiety we feel from marijuana use. When we use cannabis, THC binds to the endocannabinoid receptors throughout the brain. It's believed that this surge of cannabinoids may overstimulate the amygdala. Right, amygdala is that almond-shaped part of our brain that's responsible for the fight or flight mechanism. So when it's overstimulated by the cannabinoids, that's why we're going to be feeling a little bit more jumpy, a little bit more easier to spook, and just enter that fight or flight mode of having a panic attack, really. So this can cause us to feel stressed, anxious, and paranoid. So if you get too high and feel a little bit panicky, don't worry, there's nothing wrong with you. Paranoia is pretty commonly accepted and normal side effect from the THC in marijuana. Not only is it much easier to have a panic attack while high, but it also feels a little bit different. So let's talk about some of the differences between a panic attack while high versus a regular panic attack. When you're high, your thought patterns can take you to some pretty weird places. I like to describe it as tunnel vision thoughts or rabbit hole anxiety. Whatever you happen to be thinking about, you really seem to hone in on it and follow through deeper and deeper that train of thought. This can be extremely enjoyable if your thoughts are fully committed to something like enjoying a snack, watching a cartoon, something like that. But it can be really terrifying if your thoughts become negative and you succumb to that rabbit hole anxiety, because now your thoughts are just honing in and in on this idea and you just can't pull yourself out. This is why a weed panic attack feels so much worse than a regular panic attack. Interestingly enough, weed panic attacks tend to have more extreme peaks, but also more like extreme lows as well. So I kind of feel that any time having a high panic attack, it tends to be a little bit less rapid than a regular panic attack. It's a little bit more intense of a high and more intense of a low. You'll be really stressed out, way more panicky than you usually would be during a panic attack, but then you're also a little bit more mellowed out for a longer period of time before it kind of comes up again. That's just in my experience, but for the most part, I think that that's what you can expect from a weed panic attack. Now, some of the possible symptoms of marijuana use, some of the good ones, the pros, are increased euphoria, more relaxation, feeling giggly, feeling the munchies, just wanting to eat snacks, greater creativity, increased sensitivity to various senses, decreased pain, and stuff like that. Some of the cons now are increased anxiety or panic attacks, extreme confusion, paranoia, increased heart rate, hallucinations and delusions if you're really, really high, drowsiness, increased blood pressure, nausea and vomiting if you kind of green out and you, once again, are just way too high. Dry cotton mouth is pretty normal. Feeling weird, numbness, tingling, sensitivity to temperature. Frankly, weed is just not for everyone. If you find yourself experiencing more of the negative effects than the positive effects, you might want to consider just ditching cannabis altogether. Okay, so now what you really came here for, I want to talk about some of the greatest methods that I know of to stop a panic attack while high. So the first and probably most obvious one, but definitely we still have to talk about it, is to start low and go slow. So obviously the best way to avoid a weed panic attack is to not overdo it in the first place. What I mean by this is I'm going to tell you guys the same advice I gave my little sister when she went away to college. And when it comes to anything, weed or any other drug, if you're trying it for the first time, you should probably use less of it or half of what everyone else is. This is just so that you're playing it safe and not overdoing it or anything like that. Obviously, I'm not a doctor. I'm not telling you how to dose anything, of course. But anytime I personally try something new, or if I am talking to a family member about them trying something new, whatever kind of drug it may be, I think it's really, really important to start low and go slow. If you're at a party and you're feeling peer pressured, but you want to try something, you're curious, okay, my recommendation that I give to my own little sister throughout college was just whatever everyone else is doing, do like half or less. For the most part, especially with weed, people aren't going to be pressuring you. I don't, back when I would smoke back in the day, I was never into being like too high, and I wouldn't want to be taking like concentrated THC, like dabs and stuff like that. It was just too much for me. I knew I didn't enjoy it, so I wouldn't pretend to try to be tough or to like look cool. And the thing is with smokers, typically they're not there to peer pressure you. They're just trying to have everybody on the same vibe and feel mellow and happy and relaxed. Nobody's really going to pressure you. And if they are, they're not your friends. I'm not trying to sound like like your parent here, but that's the reality of it. People shouldn't be pressuring you into doing anything you're not comfortable with. Now, to find your sweet spot, what I typically recommend if you are smoking, you might want to take just one hit at a time and take 10 minutes in between tokes. So give yourself a little bit of a spacing. Don't feel like you need to be ripping it constantly or keeping up with anybody else. Just go at your own pace. Wait 10 minutes if you're smoking. Wait 10 minutes before you take another. That way you can actually see how you feel and assess whether or not you want to consume more cannabis or not. Now, if you're ingesting weed edibles, you want to wait probably 2 hours before deciding whether to eat more. That has a little bit more of a slow onset, so it's really important that you're patient here, because if you were just taking an edible for the first time, a lot of people make the mistake of 1 hour in, they say, oh, I don't feel that high, and then they take more, not knowing that it was going to take it 2 hours to even kick in at all. And then all of a sudden they are way too high, totally uncomfortable, and just having panic attacks. And that's a long ride to wait out, so you don't want to be having an unenjoyable time doing that. So just pace it slow. If you're smoking, I say like 10 minutes in between tokes if you want to play it safe. Or if you're taking edibles, give it like 2 hours before you take any more, if you even need any more. Edibles are usually super strong. Now, cannabis also has something called the biphasic effect. This means that there are two phases to the weed high. Marijuana can feel very different at low doses than it does at high doses. The first phase is often where I find the most positive effects, and then the second phase is where things get a little bit scarier for myself and maybe even other people as well. This is where you can feel anxious, paranoid, or stressed out. This is why, like I said, just go low and slow, because weed is an interesting plant that taking a certain amount of it is going to feel very, very different from taking a small amount. So if you don't like taking too much, don't take too much. Just keep that biphasic effect in mind. And like I said, start low, go slow. I think that start low, go slow. Really funny video about being too high. If you guys have time to check it out, look up Lil Dicky's Too High official video on YouTube. It's not safe for work at all, but it's very funny and it depicts how it feels to be too high. My second tip for you is going to be to remember that you can't overdose on weed or die from a panic attack. So this is just like my advice with any panic attack. When you're getting high, you're really scared, you're anxious, your heart's beating, you feel like, listen, I've been there, so I can tell you, your thoughts get super irrational. Even for people like me who really, really know how to deal with their panic attacks, when you're too high, you're just not thinking rationally anymore. You're really believing, that this panic attack is now going to be something that you feel every single day. Like, oh, I broke my brain. This is just how I feel now. This is awful. just remember, it's just part of the experience. You chose to do this, and it's going to be over soon. Remember, you can't overdose on weed. You can't die from it. There are so many, I'm sorry to say, but hilarious videos of recordings from people calling the ER because they're just too high. They ate too much edibles or something like that, and it's comical once you know that they're safe. But it's funny because people just really freak out. But the important thing that you have to remind yourself, say it out loud, just remember, you can't overdose on weed. You can't die from a panic attack. It's going to pass. You're going to be fine. You're not in real danger here. It's just like any other panic attack. It's going to pass. My next piece of advice for you, number 3, is going to be to change your scenery. So what I mean by this, I'll give you a little story. So the first time I ever had any type of edible, I was actually my freshman year of college, and me and my friends all ate some brownies, and then we were all sitting in the living room waiting, and eventually when the high started to come on, it felt great. We were really giggly at first. Everything was really good. I, not being as much of a smoker as my friends were in the past, I hadn't had as much experience with cannabis, and I also had twice as much as they did, which was very stupid in retrospect. I was not starting low and going slow. But anyway, I just remember a switch all of a sudden when the brownies started to kick in, and I was just way too high. We were all sitting around the living room in our common area of our college suite, just laughing, hanging out, and then all of a sudden there was just this shift in the mood. Like all of a sudden, my friends and I were all laughing, but all of a sudden I just perceived them laughing to be them laughing at me, which is not the way my brain usually would work. Obviously, that's crazy. Like, we're all laughing at some joke I said, but all of a sudden I think they're laughing at me. I think the joke's on me, and I just started to feel really weird and uncomfortable, and I wanted to like walk out of the suite and just get outside and change my scenery, but it was actually during a hurricane, so I was trapped inside. But I still transitioned. I got out of that common area and I went to my own room, and then I felt a little bit better being in my own room and just being alone for a couple of minutes rather than in a social setting in a common area. I kind of felt a little safer in my room for whatever reason. That's just how my brain was working at the moment. Now, what I mean by this, for you guys, what this means is change your scenery. It might help you a lot. So if you're alone, or maybe, if you're alone, you might feel better around other people. If you're around other people, you might feel better alone. If you're inside, you might want to take a walk outside and just appreciate nature for a little bit. Or if you're outside, consider going somewhere quiet and isolated and just being alone for a little bit. This really helps to reset your brain. Like I kind of briefly mentioned earlier, we get that tunnel vision, especially when we're high. During a panic attack, regularly we get tunnel vision, but while high, even more so. So it's super, super important to know how to change that scenery, because it kind of pulls you out of tunnel vision. It kind of just resets, and now you have something else to think about, whether it be the environment or your friends or your own thoughts. Whatever shift you need, a lot of times you can kick your brain into that next gear just by changing your environment, changing your scenery. So I think that's really important to do if your anxiety levels are peaking and you're having a panic attack while high. Just change that scenery. My 4th step for you guys is going to be to do something physical. So going off that last step, I told you about that time when I was really, really high in college off a brownie and I just wasn't having a great time. Well, sometimes it was good, but then sometimes it was really scary as well. So I remember I just like scurried up into my top bunk of my dorm, and I was just, my thoughts were all over the place. I was texting my buddy who had a lot more experience smoking weed than I did, and he was my buddy Chris, and I was just explaining the situation to him, and he was telling me, oh, just enjoy the journey, blah, blah, blah. But I couldn't even make sense of the numbers on my phone. Like, time lost all meaning to me. You guys know, you've been there. But anyway, something that really actually helped to pull me out of my head when I was just having all these weird thoughts was my buddy Liam coming in and just doing something funny, but then like tossing a ball to me. There was some kind of soccer ball or something in the room. He tossed a ball to me. I caught it. I threw it back. I'm just giggling like a child. We're throwing a ball back and forth. And like, I know how stupid that sounds, but just doing something physical pulled me out of my head and back into like reality. Like, now I'm back in the physical world rather than in my head, like just freaking out. This physical tip probably works for panic attacks during a lot of types of other drugs, not just weed, hallucinogens, stuff like that. But this physical aspect really, really helped to pull me out. So something I recommend, toss a ball around, go for a walk, do something physical, obviously something safe, but do something physical that's going to help you change your mindset a little bit and just enjoy the high and have a better time rather than being stuck in your head. Tip number 5, another one that's pretty common to a lot of regular panic attacks, but also even more important while high, give yourself a bigger problem to work on. So one of the best things about being high is that you're thinking way more creatively than usual. Don't let those creative thoughts work against you. If your thoughts want to run 100 miles an hour, give them a better direction to run in. Work on a problem, work on a creative solution to something. Try to give yourself something meaningful to think about and use that different way that your brain is thinking to your advantage. However this may be, it's going to be different for you than it would be for me, but just try to give your brain something to work on rather than working against itself. Tip number 6. Kind of something similar, but do something creative. So drawing, coloring, writing, dancing, any of these are fine. Doing something creative will help to ground you in reality while putting your overthinking to use and distracting you from the weed panic attack. This is something that can be beneficial for most people and even fun, but it kind of works on some of the other principles we talked about. You're using your brain productively, you're pulling yourself back into reality. Try to do something creative, whatever it is. Dance around, that's kind of a physical one too. Draw, make some music, anything like that. Do something creative. 7 is to get under the covers. So what I mean by this, I'll tell you, I have been in my own childhood home, probably in high school or early college or something like that. And I just remember smoking at my parents' house where I lived at the time and just getting a little bit too high. And all of a sudden, I don't know about you guys, but when I am a little bit too high, I get more sensitive to the cold or just temperature in general. And in this particular instance, I was just really cold and shivering. I actually took a fudgesicle out of the freezer and I was eating a fudgesicle, which is probably why I was cold, because I was eating a fudgesicle and that like made me super sensitive to temperature. And I literally just set it down, went under the covers and just laid under the covers until I felt comfortable, and then I was so comfortable I couldn't even get up. I just remember watching from across the room. I watched this entire fudgesicle just melt on my desk. And so my mom came in and yelled at me about it. But that's one of my tips, is to just get under the covers. If you're trying to remember how to stop a panic attack while high, don't dismiss the value of a nice warm blanket, especially like a weighted blanket or something like that. But it's just going to add a little bit more comfort and help you feel a little bit more secure and get you through the panic attack, especially if you're feeling like shivery, which sometimes happens to me when I'm a little bit too high and feeling anxious. Tip number 8 is going to be to eat some snacks. So this sounds weird, and how could this help you with a panic attack? I'll tell you. So if obviously everyone knows the best thing about being high is how good snacks taste. Now, if you're having a panic attack from cannabis, try to rotate a few different snack options. What I used to like to do was have something salty, something sweet, something savory, and me and my friends would just have all these different snacks and just rotate between them. I mean, something that I find useful for pulling out of panic attacks ever is to just really try to envision and appreciate any kind of sensory input you can that's not your panic attack. So in this case, it would be taste. Close your eyes and just really try to appreciate the taste of everything you're tasting. So the sweetness, the saltiness, the savoriness, whatever it is you're eating, try to like really just enjoy it and be in the moment, be present, be grounded. This I know it sounds weird, but like this is the best thing about being high, and you might as well run with it. And just that kind of sensory input is actually really beneficial and really distracting from your panic attack. So it'll help to pull your thoughts into a little bit more of a positive space. It's hard to have a panic attack while you're also fully enjoying another activity like the amazing food that you hopefully have prepared. Also, while doing this, this will be number 9, I think. Also, watch a funny show or a cartoon. Another great way to stop a panic attack while high is to watch a funny show. Stand-up routines, stoner comedies, nostalgic cartoons, these are all great options for this method. Just like enjoying the snacks, the ability to appreciate humor is greatly amplified while under the influence of marijuana. If you don't have a friend around to talk or laugh with, and even if you do, put on something funny to laugh at and your panic attack will probably dissipate in seconds. Another way, so I think this is 10, is to play a video game. So there's a reason why video games are such a stereotypical hobby of stoners, and it's because playing video games while high is just so much more enjoyable. The right video game could immerse you in a whole new world, or just require enough attention to pull you out of your head and into the screen. Some games actually might be a little bit more difficult to play while high, but others are going to be perfectly suitable for this state of mind. So give video games a shot the next time you're feeling a little bit high. Turn on the cartoons, have some snacks. These things, especially all combined together, are just an amazing combo. This is why people get high in the first place. This is why those are the stereotypical hobbies of stoners. If you're going to get stoned, do it the way the stoners do it. Like, appreciate all those little things, the snacks, the cartoons, the comedy, the video games. These things go so well with being high, and they're just going to really immerse you in something else and help you appreciate your state of mind rather than have it working against you. Tip number 11 that I have for you guys to stop a panic attack while high is to chew on some black peppercorn or pine nuts. So studies show that certain plant components can work as incredible antidotes to the intoxicating effects of THC. This is because they contain terpenoids or terpenes. These are things like black peppercorn, pine nuts, and lemon. They'll either contain pinene or limonene or something similar to that. And they basically, what people have found is that sniffing ground peppercorn, so like the peppercorns that you might have to grind up in your cabinet somewhere in your kitchen, or chewing on a few peppercorn balls, is a long-known remedy to weed paranoia. Alternatively, eating some pine nuts or drinking maybe even some lemonade if it contains terpenes like limonene can actually help to counteract the negative effects of THC and just sort of like sober you up, I guess, kind of end some of that paranoia for you that's coming from the THC. So definitely consider that. I mean, I think probably for most people, the easiest thing is black peppercorn. Just go in that cabinet, maybe pop one or two in your mouth and crunch them or sniff them. And this should really help to sober you up a little bit and to pull you out of those panicky negative effects that come from that THC intoxication. Tip number 12 for you guys is to use a different supplement to pull yourself out of that negative thought spiral that's coming as a result of being too high and having a panic attack. So this is any of the supplements typically. Now, I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to tell you which supplements to mix with marijuana. I don't know. What I will tell you is that on my website, don'tpanicdothis.com, or even on other videos on this YouTube channel, you're going to find all kinds of supplements that might help with anxiety, and I'll even talk about how they've worked for me and what situations I think they're best for. I would check those out. Those are all things that I think highly of, and I think have helped me with my own panic attacks and anxiety. But these things can really be good just to have an ace up the sleeve, even just knowing that they're there, that if things get scary for you, you can always take an anxiety supplement and it'll help you sort of balance out those negative panicky effects. I think that that can be really substantial for a lot of people. So if you don't already have an anxiety supplement that you know and love, make sure you check out our website, don'tpanicdothis.com, and check out the anxiety supplements section and really just learn, which ones might work best for you and can actually help you with a weed panic attack. Tip number 13, guys, it sounds like not much, but really think about what I'm saying here. So my advice for you for number 13 is just don't take it so seriously. The cannabis high continuously changes. If you don't like where your head's at, make sure you change your environment or change your thought process. But it's really, really important to remind yourself exactly what you signed up for, exactly what this is, and just don't take yourself so seriously. When I get too high, if I get panicky or anxious or anything like that, a lot of times my brain will just work so strange. I'm sure you guys understand. I'll enter like thought loops, or where I'm just thinking the same thoughts over and over again, or I'll hone in on a certain strange thought and just can't pull myself out of it, or even like time loops, I guess I would describe them as, where sometimes I'll be like unsure of the timeline that brought me from the living room to the bathroom, or I'll just be staring at my phone for like 20 minutes or in the mirror for a long time and just realizing like, oh wow, how long have I been doing this? And oftentimes it's a normal amount of time. Like, oh, I just looked at my phone casually, but my brain will start to wonder like, was that an inappropriate amount of time that I was staring at something like my phone or the mirror? Like, am I being weird? Your brain just works so funny, so strangely when you're high, and it just thinks like really meta, like it really thinks about itself and it really thinks about your own thoughts. It just gets really, really weird. And a lot of times it's helpful just to remember not to take it so seriously. Just remember to laugh about it. Like, this is just some funny plant you consumed to have these effects, really, to think differently, and just try to find some humor in that and try to laugh it off. And just remember, like, it's gonna end. I can't even tell you how many times I've been set off in a panic because I was too high, and all of a sudden I'm wondering why my brain's working that way, or I'm doing something weird. That's what you signed up for. If you don't like it, don't do it again. But for the here and now, like once you're in it, once you're too high, just try to laugh it off, try to appreciate it, and don't take it so seriously. Like, this is what some people are finding a way to enjoy it. Try to have a different perspective. Try to find a way to enjoy how silly you're being, how funny your brain is working, and just try not to take yourself so seriously. Just try to enjoy it. So my big final tip here, tip number 14, I want to give you guys some homework to do, something else that you can do after this video. And that tip is going to be just to practice general panic attack techniques. So whether you're high or not, it's really, really important to know how to stop a panic attack when they happen. If you're high and you only have panic attacks while high, okay, that's great. But it's still not going to hurt to know how to calm yourself down, whether you're high or whether you're not high, just having these techniques. We talk all about so many coping mechanisms for panic attacks and anxiety on my website and in other videos on my channel. So make sure you check those out. Check out our articles on how to stop panic attacks and just some of the methods, the coping mechanisms that you can really use, exposure therapy, stuff like that, and just learn what panic attacks are, learn what anxiety is. And this is really gonna help you going forward. So that's my biggest recommendation for you if you take anything from this. Learn some general panic attack techniques to help you deal with those feelings going forward. Finally, I wanna leave you guys with some quick FAQs, some related questions. I'm gonna read them off here. I've already written them, so I'm not gonna pretend to be making them up on the spot, but I just want to address a few of these questions. If you don't want to hear me talk, you could always check out the article that I linked to below. Anyway, so first off, does CBD oil decrease anxiety? THC and CBD are among the most common cannabinoids found in cannabis and the ones you tend to hear the most about. THC is the one that will actually be responsible for the anxiety symptoms of cannabis. You may have better luck with straight CBD oil, which tends to have a more relaxing effect on users. I would not dismiss this as a potential way to supplement against anxiety. So what I mean by this is if you want the relaxation effects of cannabis but not the paranoia, CBD oil is probably a smarter way for you to go. CBD oil is not likely to make you feel anxious the way that THC does in regular cannabis, and that's why edibles and stuff like that can make us really, really anxious. CBD oil might be a better option for some people, and it's definitely worth checking out if you're trying to deal with anxiety or pain or anything like that. But it's not going to get you high, so to speak. You're not going to have those same psychoactive, giggly effects. How long does being high last? Depending on the amount of THC consumed and the method of consumption, a high can last anywhere from 2 to 10 hours. Obviously, if you're smoking, it's going to be a much shorter high than if you consumed edibles. Factors such as tolerance, body weight, amount consumed, and THC quantity are all contributing factors to the duration of a marijuana high. Now, what about indica versus sativa strains? If you guys are new to smoking or just new to cannabis in general, you might not know the difference between these strains. There's 3 major strains: indica, sativa, and hybrids, which kind of combine a little bit of both. Indica strains are better known for their body high and relaxation, while sativa is more known for an energized head high. Hybrids combine elements of both. In my personal experience, I find that even an indica strain, which is typically known for being more relaxing, even indica strains can cause bad anxiety and panic attacks. So I really believe it's more about your mindset, which is going to play a larger role in your high rather than which strain you're smoking. But it's something to keep in mind. If you're going to try both, you might have a preference over one or the other. One might make you more stressed than the other. Now, edibles versus smoking. For those who are susceptible to anxiety, I would personally steer clear of edibles just because they're usually so much more intense. It's kind of a different high than a normal smoking high, and it's also just a lot stronger. The reason for this is also because, like I kind of mentioned earlier, one of my big recommendations is to start low and go slow, and that's really hard to do when it comes to an edible. You can rarely tell how much you've consumed until you've hit the point of no return. So if anxiety and weed panic attacks are issues for you, then you're probably better with more of a method of consumption that you can control a little bit, which would probably be just something like smoking. Then we have the buzz versus the high versus the stone. So cannabis typically hits you in 3 stages. There's the buzz, the high, and the stone. The buzz is where I like to be. It's kind of like the most minimal of it all. And this has all the positives to a degree. You know, you're a little bit more giggly and euphoric and more relaxed with not as much of the downside. The high occurs once you've consumed a little bit more, and this is where things can either get better or worse. You know, you can be having a better time or you can be a little bit more anxious. Once you've hit stone, you've basically had so much cannabis that you just feel tired and want to melt into the couch. And at this point, anxiety isn't even usually an issue anymore. I feel most anxious when you're right around the high. Kind of the buzz is when you don't have quite as much, and then the stone is when you have so much that you're too tired to even be anxious. In my personal experience, it can be very different for different people. Kind of like being too drunk stops being an issue once you're blacked out. You're not going to be saying stupid things and starting a fight once you're blacked out. You're done. You're just asleep, if not hopefully throwing up. But yeah, so I would recommend if anxiety is an issue, try to just stay around a buzz. You can slowly try to see if you prefer to be more high over time, but especially if you're new to smoking, there's no reason to get more than a buzz, in my opinion. Now, the last question I have for you guys is, should I dial 911 if I get too high? The short answer is no. You should not dial 911 if you get too high from smoking cannabis. This is a call that emergency operators get frequently from people suffering through their first panic attack or the first time they're smoking weed and they're just super paranoid. You're not going to die, and you shouldn't be wasting emergency responders' time for a marijuana call. For laughs, you can honestly check out any number of, well, there's actually a video you could check out by The Leaf called Anxious Rapper, which is really funny about getting too high and calling for an ambulance. But also there's a ton of recordings, like I mentioned earlier, of people getting too high and calling ambulance responders. And in retrospect, it's just funny. It's because they're not in any real danger. So unless you have some other pre-existing condition that is actually occurring simultaneously with you being too high in and of itself is not a reason to call 911, not at least from marijuana or cannabis use. And that's all I have for you guys today. I hope that this was helpful to a lot of you. I know that these are certainly things that I could have used when I had been too high in the past and had panic attacks while high. Like I said, it's a little bit more intense than your regular panic attacks. So if this was helpful to you, please share this with your friends. I'd love other people to have this information. And also liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing is really, really helpful to me. Helps me create more content and grow as we go along. If you guys have been too high from smoking, I would love you to share your stories with me. I already mentioned a bunch of embarrassing, funny ones in this video, so I'd love to hear your own experiences, as well as some of the ways you have been able to manage your panic attacks while high. So thank you so much for sticking to the end, guys. I will see you next time.